events and conditional statements within React.js. Now, events allows us to control what to do when user interacts with your web page. So for example, when user clicks on a button, hovers the mouse over a particular area or a component or a section or a div, what should we do? Whether he presses a button, clicks on a link, every interaction that user performs are known as events. How do we handle those events using React.js? And then how do we make decisions based on what we want to do using conditional statements or if statements? So today on day number 6, we're going to talk about that specifically. We am again going to use W3Schools website. If you follow along, it's excellent website. It has all the notes, and our reason for using is so that you have a material that you can easily follow along. Okay, so rather than just watching the video, you need to follow along. That's the best practice to learn. So make sure you have a website open, you follow along the material, you follow along the notes, follow along the examples, and then we can easily learn this React.js within 10 days. So on day number 6, let's go and learn more about props. By the way, still haven't subscribed, please do. We need that support from you guys. The more you subscribe, the more comments you leave, it encourages us to keep on making these videos. And I'm making these videos regularly, so don't forget to follow along and then leave your comments. Let me know what you learned, what you don't learn, what you didn't understand, so that I can help you out. Any problems you're having, let me know so that I can make specific tutorials on that particular thing. Okay, let's begin. So what exactly are React events? Now, we have talked about classes, components, props, and everything, but they are nothing without creating the events within the system. The events allows us to do the user interaction. Okay, so every time user interacts with the system, it's triggering something called an event. So when user views the browser, clicks on the links, clicks on the button, types a thing, hovers the mouse over it, all these actions that a user perform are known as events. And obviously React can easily handle and deal with those events as well. Just like HTML DOM events, React can perform actions based on user events. Okay, so React has the same events as HTML, such as click, change, mouse over, mouse hover, mouse over link, mouse left. So many events are there in HTML. All those events are actually absolutely same and supported in React. How do we add events inside the React? React events are written in camel class syntax. Now, if you know about camel class, excellent. If you know, camel class syntax basically refers to that the first letter is always small letter and the second word becomes a capital letter. Hence, it creates what they call a hump. Hence, it's known as what we say CamelCase syntax. Okay, so in terms of React, we use this CamelCase syntax, meaning the first letter always has to be small, and the second letter of the word has to be, or the first letter of the second word has to be capital letter. So on is one word starting with a small, click is a second word. Because it's a second word, it has to start with a capital letter instead of on click. So in a typical HTML, we use on click. This would work fine, no problem as that. It's not case sensitive. However, in React, it follows what we call strict camel case syntax. The first letter always needs to be small, and the second word, if there is a second word, that word must start with a capital. Okay, so React event handlers are written inside the curly brackets. Now that's one key other thing. So when we do events inside the React, they are written inside the curly brackets. So on click, again on first starting with the small, and click second word starting with the C capital. So on click is equals to bracket start, bracket close, shoot. This is how we write React event. Whereas if you are doing in HTML, we use on click, small letters, all, and then brackets, inverted quotations, shoot with the parenthesis. This indicates it's an event or event function called shoot. Okay, so and this is a typical HTML syntax, but if you are using React, now you have to use this bracket start, bracket close. Again, we talked about they represent JavaScript expressions. So this basically means we are executing a JavaScript expression, bracket start, bracket close, which in this case is an event. Okay, so in the React, we write button, on click, bracket start, bracket close, shoot. This is how we basically write it. So this basically means that when user clicks on a button, a shoot event will be triggered, or shoot function will trigger, a component will be triggered that will perform certain different actions. On click is an event. So on click shoot will basically mean that every time user clicks on this button, a shoot component will be triggered and it will perform its task. Whereas if you're doing same in HTML, HTML uses on click, shoot with inverted quotations, and then shoot function. This is a typical HTML syntax. This becomes our what we call React syntax. Okay, so let's explore some example in detail to understand how this is working. So for example, we have a component called function. Okay, this function takes a football name, constant, we define shoot. Okay, so this is our again function that we use and it's bracket start bracket close, having an arrow function syntax, alert, great shot. This basically means that every time we want some action to be performed in place of an event, we execute and call this arrow function here, okay, inside our component. Inside our component, we have this arrow function, and when the return button on click, bracket start bracket close, shoot. So every time user clicks on a button, it will execute this shoot event. Understand? So now we have a normal code. React DOM, create a document dot element by ID, find out the root, render this football component on that root element. So when this root element is rendered, it will have a button on it. Every time user clicks on a button, the shoot function will be called, which is this function. Again, this can be any function, anything that you define yourself. So the syntax and the way we write it, we use constant shoot is equals to bracket start bracket close and then arrow function bracket start bracket close, and then we define the code, which is a standard JavaScript code. Anything you write here into form of JavaScript would work fine. This is a typical syntax of how we define any event. If you want to check out the code, okay, so you see this, we have an import statements, we have a function component, we have return. So when we print it, it will print basically a button on the screen using the render node. So we get the button here. If I click on a button, it prints an alert message using JavaScript, window object, great shot. That's how it's done. Okay, so every time you want to create a event, you basically write the code with it using the syntax. You write the function name and how it goes. So passing arguments to this function. Okay, so now if to pass an argument to an event handler, use an arrow function. So again, we're going to use the same arrow function. We say, hey, function constant shoot, and then we provided a name. Okay, previously there was no argument, okay, inside the brackets, inside the arrow function. Now we're using again the angle A. A is basically an argument. So when I click on this button, I call the on click event. Okay, this is again simple HTML with a capital C for the React, bracket start, bracket close. Okay, inside it, we use the arrow function again, bracket start, bracket close, arrow function, call the shoot argument. Now, because previously there was no argument, we just used the shoot keyword. There was no arrow function needed here. But now, because we are passing arguments, the syntax differs a little bit. This time, you have to create an arrow function with the same name as shoot, and then you have to provide it an argument. Okay, in inverted quotations. Now, again, remember, we are calling it an argument, not a prop, because a prop comes with a key as well. So the way the props work, you need to use a key and then a value. Here, we just passing it as a direct argument, not saving it inside the prop objects. Okay, so now this becomes a key syntax. So do always remember, if you are passing an argument to your function, you have to create an arrow function here as well. Bracket start, bracket close, equal to angle bracket shoot, and then you provide an argument which will go here and will print it. So if you want to execute the code, click here, it prints the goal, because in our code we say, hey, on click button, print this string goal. This string is then passed to this argument here when we call it, and then alert uses that argument to print it on the screen. Okay, but the syntax again has to be in this form. So with square curly brackets indicating the JavaScript expression inside the React, and then we use the arrow function syntax to create a function declaration, and then we pass it here. Make sense? Hopefully a little bit, right? So this is how all it works. So React event object. Now what exactly we mean by React event object? So event handlers have access to React event that they trigger functions. In other words, when we execute an event, React will know which type of event was triggered, and we can use that to customize our code even further. So whether user has clicked on it, or key press has been done, key release has been done, hover action has been done. If you want to know what type of event was triggered, we use this React event object. Okay. To do that, if you come inside this code here, we have on click, and then now see this, the arrow function again is there, but this time we use an event object. This is what it is talking about, that we use the event object to define that what type of event we want to create. So we don't have to provide on click here, nothing. We just use this default event object. This is what it is talking about, that it is an event object existing inside the React. We just pass it as an argument inside the arrow function here. So we used, hey, event, again, arrow, shoot, and then we goal, comma, event. So what this whole syntax now does is it passes the current event which triggered this whole thing together as an object through this event. then it's going to be read by this b variable because this is the second argument. And then we use another because this is the default object, we use b dot type. Type again is a value that exists inside this event, and it's going to return to us that what type of event triggered this function. Okay, in this case it's going to be click event. So if it's on click, it's on click. If you use a hover event, mouse over, mouse release, button press, button release, so many events are there in HTML. Again, if you want to learn more about HTML events, check out my tutorial on the channel. I've already talked extensively about what type of events we have in HTML and how we use them. So these events, or again, you can check out on the W3Schools website as well, and the whole reference list is there. So find it out there. So what this is doing now is using on-click, event, and shoot. So this is the typical syntax that we follow. In this case, event has been used 2 times. So we are actually passing an event argument here. This event argument is actually passed then to this one. So we are first passing the argument, which is then used inside this shoot arrow function. Then this event actually goes here, and it's going to be using the b dot type to find out what type of event we have. If I come on site event, if I click here, see this, it says click. See, I have not printed the word click anywhere. I'm just passing the event argument here, and I'm saying, hey, shoot goal event, but I'm using b dot type. So this b dot type will tell me this is click event. If it's hover, it will be hover, on mouse over, on mouse click, so on and so forth. So any type of event that is triggering this function will be passed on. That way we can find out, okay, what type of event there is, and based on that we can customize our code, make some specific decisions on how things are working. So any button, any options you want, you basically just use this simple logic to create events within our system. Okay, now moving on further, let's talk more about React conditional rendering, or in other words, conditional statements. Like every other programming language, even like JavaScript itself, we have if statements. This allows us to make decisions. In a React, you can conditionally render components. That's the key thing here. So we have if else statements. All JavaScript standard code can work inside React based on the JavaScript expressions. But what we are talking now here is that using the if statement, you can conditionally do rendering, that which component should be rendered on a screen. So assumingly you have 3 to 4 different components, but based on what user is doing, I make a decision on what needs to be rendered on the screen. So we can do that using the simple if statements. Okay, the way it works is that, for example, we have 2 components. One component is called missed goal, second component is called made a goal, right? So now we have 2 events. One component here, second one is called made goal. It prints goal. This one prints missed. We have 2 components existing. Now we want to make decision based on if that which component to load. To do that, we use again another third function called goal. It takes props as an argument. When we call it, for example, goal, this function here, we pass it the prop called is goal false, for example. Okay, so we pass an argument to this prop called false. Now this basically means that we have an information that if user did a goal, we pass it a value. So constant is goal props dot is goal value is passed here. Okay, so this basically again meaning that when I execute, I call the goal, which will actually call this goal method or goal component. Okay, first. Second, because I'm calling a goal with a prop, this prop will be passed to this prop here. Okay, so now this prop will contain this prop value here. Is goal is equals to false. I've written this again inside curly brackets, not as an inverted quotation value. Why? Because this is now a Boolean type data, true or false. So this becomes a Boolean type data. That's why we write inside curly brackets for JavaScript expression, keeping in mind. So because we are passing it a false as a data type, as a Boolean data type, we pass it as a value inside angle square curly brackets. So this false actually will be saved inside the props information. Okay, so this props will contain the false value. So now what I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, go inside the props dot is goal. So this is goal is actually coming from here. So this is goal will be this value here, so which contains the value false. Simply makes sense. Excellent. So this false can then be saved inside this is goal variable here. So this is goal now will contain the value false. Okay, so this value false is actually saved inside this is goal value. That's how it's basically following the cycle. So now we're checking if is goal is true. This value now, if it is true, execute this block. Else, if this is false, then execute this block. Okay, so inside one main function, we have two different components. If the condition is true, execute this component, render this component on the screen. Else, if this condition becomes false, return this thing. That way, we have a value. Okay, so if you want to check out the example, it says missed because the condition is false. If I change it to true and re-execute it, it will tell us, hey, it's wonderful, it's working with that. Okay, condition becomes true because if it is true, it's going to say made goal component. So the made goal component will be executed, printing goal. Okay. Wonderful. Right. So that's how basically conditional statements tends to work, and they will print our values to it. So we can very easily use this thing for conditional statements where we want to check and see that if the statements are working properly, or which statement to show based on the user's decision. Conditions: if the user has done this task, enter the value. If one text is there, he clicks on a button. If the data is there, then show the second component, then show the third component. Most websites, like for example, Samsung's website or Apple websites, have a long website. As they scroll, they load the component on the screen, one single large page. So based on the scrolling, they load contents. Okay, so this is one common way of doing it using the React, loading the components at runtime based on the decision what we are making. Okay, within the if, you can use what we call the logical AND operators. Another way of conditionally rendering a React component is by using the double AND operator. We can embed a JavaScript expression in JSX by using the curly brackets. Okay, and you can use this double AND to make a decision. How do we do that? So for example, we have a function, again garage. It takes a props. So that means that when I execute the garage function, I pass it a prop. Cars is equals to a car. This time cars is basically an constant, but we're having a array elements. So I have a Ford, BMW, Audi. So I have this array variable. It contains an array. So I pass this as an argument here because I'm passing an value passing an object array. Hence, I use a curly brackets. Okay, makes sense. We have already talked about how we pass props. Once this is done, then this basically means that I have a prop that contains cars. So I say props dot cars, this variable value, and then whatever value is here, assign it to this cars variable again. Then return again, because we are using multiple values, we use curly brackets, round brackets, sorry, okay, with semicolon, and then it has to have a single node. So we provided a single node, h1 garage. Now cars dot length. So it will tell me how many cars are there in this array. If this array length is greater than 0, and h1 h2. Okay, so what this is doing is that if this equates to true, the expression after and double and will render. If it is false, nothing will happen in this case because we have not written here. So see this, there's no if statement here. We are using curly brackets to start and then a curly brackets to end. So these curly brackets are there. There is no if word written here. Okay, that's what this AND operation or AND expression actually renders into. So we are saying, hey, write an expression. So curly brackets again represent the JavaScript expression. So we are just using an expression without the if. We are saying cars dot length is greater than 0. If the condition is true, AND statement will be executed. If it is false, nothing will happen. Okay. 99% of time, I always prefer and recommend you students using the if. It's a standard convention, makes things 200 times easy to understand. But it's always there. There are certain times some developers now tend to use this thing. But for me, it's always confusing. Where's the if? What's the condition? Where's the block? What's happening? But it is still there to know that, hey, we can do that in React. Is wonderful. Then ternary operators. Now, ternary operators are again very common in JavaScript, Python, Java. In most programming languages, they tend to use the ternary operator. It's called a single line equal to comparison. Make a condition based on that. If the condition is true, the first part is executed, colon. If the condition is false, the second part is executed. The way it works is that we use is goal. Again, same thing. We call a goal component. We provided an argument called is goal is equals to, you pass it a value called false. So props will have a value called false. We save it inside another variable. So we take the value from here and we save it inside another variable. You can directly use this as well here, no problem. But again, this is just a programming logic, depends how you want to do coding. Usually it's like you take this value and you save it inside is goal. And so we check is goal. If this value is true, execute the first component. If this value is false, execute the second component. Okay, so based on if it is true, the first component will be executed. If it is false, the second component will be executed after the colon. So here the colon and question marks are quite important. Question mark is like, hey, is it true or false? So this is where the if condition or the decision is being made. So this condition will say if this is true, question mark is like question, right? If this is true, execute the first part. If this is false, execute the part after the colon. So after the colon, the second part is there. This becomes our ternary operator. Again, this logic is exactly same almost in every single programming language. If you're coming from any other language, you might just know already about them and use them conveniently. Okay, so this is what we talk about in terms of condition. Have you ever wanted to create your own web app but felt like coding was only for tech geniuses? Well, guess what? You don't need to be a coding wizard to build your first app using React.js. By the end of this session, you will have your own React app up and running. And no, we are not talking about boring theory. This is all about getting your hands dirty with the practical example. Today, I will show you step by step how to create an to-do app even if you have never written a single line of code before. So here's the roadmap for today. First, we will talk about what React is and why it's such a big deal in web development. Next, we will get your tools ready. Think of this like setting up your art supplies before painting. Then we will dive into the building blocks of React, such as components and JSX, which are basically like the Lego bricks of web apps. After that, we will get into the fun part, actually building your app, which is to-do app for our first example. Finally, we will jazz it up with some styling and interactivity. By the time we are done, you will have a working React app that you can show off to your friends, your boss, or even your cat. You will also get a solid understanding of some React's core concepts and how they work together to create a cool, dynamic web apps. React is like a Swiss Army knife of web development, created by Facebook. It powers apps you probably use every day like Instagram or Netflix. Its main job, making the user interface, the buttons, menus, and layouts look awesome and work seamlessly. All right, so before we dive in, let's make sure your toolkit is ready. Think of Node.js as the engine that runs your React app and NPM as the app store for your libraries you will need. We will use VS Code because it's like having a Swiss Army knife for coding. It's got everything. So make sure you download Node.js from the web server. Again, just Google it out, download Node.js, and you will have the link. Then we're going to need the Node NPM package manager for managing your libraries. I will show you how you do that in your VS Code along with VS Code editor itself. So make sure you have these three things already in your systems. Then we're going to use something called some developer extensions inside the VS Code. Again, I already have posted a detailed tutorial on how to download, install all these things together and configure React.js using VS Code. So check out the link in the description or in the I icon above. You will find a video that tells you everything. But I will again quickly go through some of these basic aspects. So now let's create a to-do app. This is the coding version of a sticky note. Simply yet a super useful. Okay guys, so as discussed, we will be developing this very simple to-do app. The idea is very simple. You just come here, enter the task, and then click on add button. It adds the tasks to it. Okay, so we have a list of tasks available. Every task you add here will be added to the list. At the same time, you can click on delete and it will delete the particular task. How do we build this simple to-do app using React.js? Well, let's go on to VS Code and start building it. So once you are inside the React VS Code, first click on open folder and open the folder or project folder. What by that we mean that in your My Documents or any place that you are working on, create a folder called React.js projects. So all your projects are inside this particular folder. Just makes things more easy. So I've created a folder called React.js projects. I just double click on it and click open. So now this project is open for me. I already have a default Hello World project. Now for us to create a new project, what we need to do is we need to follow certain basic steps. Okay, the first thing is we need to create a project. Okay, after Node.js has been installed, you can come here and type in npm create and then write @latest. Okay, as soon as you do that, this will go and create the npm project for you using the latest version of React through White. Just give a few minutes and it will process and create few basic necessary library files for you. Okay, so once the npx project is created, create white project is done, you will be prompted to enter your project name. So for example, I can say my to do dash app. Okay, so it's yeah, sorry, my to do app. Okay, so I created this app, and let me just spell this so small. Press enter. So this will say, hey, this is your project name. I said yes. Press enter. Now it's going to ask us for the framework, and then just use the arrow key to scroll down and just choose the, hey, I'm going to use the React framework. And then within the React framework, I'm going to use JavaScript. So now again, select JavaScript and press enter, and voila, your project is created. Now, this basically means that if you note here in your React project, you will have a folder called My To Do App Project. In your terminal, you will find that there is no To Do app here. So you basically need to go into that project folder. So I'm going to type in My To Do dash app. Okay, so CD basically means change directory. So go to My To Do app here. So now you can see your basic default path with My To Do app. So now you are inside your To Do app. Okay, so once you are here, now what you need to do is you need to install the npm packages in your project folder. To do that, you type in npm and ins install. Okay, so what this will do, it will install the required packages in your folder. This is one key step that you need to follow. This will take some time. Okay, so just give it a few moments, and hopefully once this is done, it will go and install all the required folders and packages for you, and then you can just run the npm command to do that. So let's wait a few seconds. Okay, so once this is done, now you will see that it's my to do app npm packages are installed. It will tell you that all packages and everything is done. Once this is done, now you just need to run npm run space dev. Okay, once you do that, it will go and run the npm server, and it will give you the white npm localhost. Once I click on this one, I think command click, it will go and open up the default npm project for us. That's how we create and run the project. We have a default project. If you click on it, it's just a simple counter app. Okay, so now if I come inside my to-do app, you will find that all projects and necessary files are installed. Inside this src folder, this is where we will try to do most of our work. We don't try to tamper with any other files. Let's just look into the basic structure of how things are. So I'll close my previous files. Okay, so inside here, the first thing is we start with index.html. This is like the starting point. So once I open it, we get the default index.html. This is the first file that gets loaded into our browser. Within this, you will notice that there's nothing much. We metadata information, and then we have an ID called root, okay, with a div tag, and then we have a script module src main.jsx. So this means that this div is basically where our content will be rendered or replaced using React.js. And then the script that we want to load is, again, it's supposed to be a module based src main.jsx inside the SRS folder. Inside the SRS source folder, you will find there's a file called main.jscs. So now this is the file that actually gets loaded inside our HTML. So from here, we go to main.jsx. Now inside here, you will notice that we have few options: header import files, import strict mode from React, import create root from DOM client, and then import app from app.jsx. Now this is where our major code actually is inside the app. Because we have imported this app, now we'll notice that inside our create root, document.get element by id root, render strict mode is there. Now again, I'm going to explain this a little bit in detail later on. But what's this doing now is it's rendering the component on this index file. To render the component, first it needs to find the root element. The root element actually exists inside the HTML file. So it's going inside the document. So hey, go inside my document, get element by ID called root. This is again standard JavaScript that fetches the div tag that has an ID called root, which again, if we select the index file, is this div ID root. It's finding this element, and then what's it doing is it is replacing this root content or the content inside this div using the render method. It's rendering the Java React.js app. Okay, so main what it's doing is just basically connecting with the index file and replacing the content. Okay, so finding the root element, getting an element, and then rendering the React.js code. The rendering will basically means it's just following a strict mode, and then app there. So now this is a simple tag which is basically loading this app.jsx. Okay, so what we're doing is we are importing our code and saving it inside this app, and then we're calling this app here. So this is a component. In other words, in Java and React.js, we call this as a standard component. Okay. So this component is basically now being rendered here on our web page. That's it. So now where exactly is this code? So if you look into the output, you get all these things happening. Whereas this is actually a component that exists now in app.jsx. The main dot file is loading this app.jsx. That's how the lifecycle or this process works. Inside here, you will notice that we have the main code of doing every single thing. Understand? Wonderful. So now this is our default app. From here, we will start working with our own custom code. So now let's begin. So in this code, what I will do is I will just select Control A and delete everything. Okay. So that way, in fact, let's just leave it there. Control Z, Control S, save it. What I do is best is create Control N for a new file. And let's start beginning creating our own component. So first, let me just save this. So inside the same SRS folder, I will save it as to do app.jsx. Okay, that way I will be saving my own app component. Obviously, you can create multiple app components. So we already have this default app component. You can delete this and just overwrite the code. Or what sometimes I do is just leave the default code as it is, and I can go inside this src and create my own to do app component. Okay, so the once I double click, I have this now. The way we started, first of all, we need to import, and we're going to say, hey, import React, and then we're going to use comma and bracket start bracket close, and we're going to specify something called use state, okay, from React. Okay, what this will do, it will import the use state feature, which will basically track our hooks and information within our code. So we let it there be. Then we create something called a component. To create a component, we use function and we say to do app bracket start bracket close, and then curly bracket start curly bracket close. So this is where how we start creating our own component. So this becomes our major default component. Function indicates that I'm creating a component. In standard JavaScript, this means that I'm using a basically function, a component. But in React.js, we call it a component because it behaves like a component. Okay. So again, we're going to talk about this as we go along. So for now, we just say, hey, let's just create a default component using a function, give it any particular name. Usually recommended we name it same as the file name, makes things a lot more easier. Once here, basically what you need to do is one main important aspect of every function is that you need to have a return value and it needs to return some HTML content. That's it. So if, for example, I will write h1 and then I can say hello world. Okay, so we get our first default hello world app created for us. So now this basically means that we have created our component and then we have called that component here. Once this is done, this is what every standard Java React.js component looks like. Creating a function, giving it a name, needs to have a return statement, and then the return statement must be an HTML. That's the standard basic law that you need to follow. Once you understand that, you will know that, okay, this is what we are supposed to do. So every component must have a tag and that tag must be returned properly. Okay. Once you do that, that's it. Now, finally, in order to use this component, we need to export it and we're going to tell it as a default. And then we're going to say this is to do app. Okay. What this will do is it will allow us to export this component and use it in another file. So we created a very simple component called to do app that returns a hello world, and then we just export it as a default app. That's it. Wonderfully done. Very simple, very easy, very basic. Understand? Now, how do we use this component? So Control S, we have saved it. So we go back to our main.jsx. Okay. Inside here, we need, this is the main file. Okay. This is where the main React.js code is going to be. So here we're going to import our component first. We're going to say import to do app from, and then we're going to use the path here. So we're going to say, listen, I have a file name called dot backslash. Oops. I'm going to say dot backslash, and then now you see this, the name pops up to do.jsx. So now we're telling it, hey, I want to import this component in this main file. First, you need to do that. Control S. Then again, we use the same code. So we're going to say, hey, create root. So we're going to create a new root element and then create the root element on this tag here. So this tag is going to be document.getElementById root. This is a standard JavaScript. So we say go inside the document, which is actually your index file. Inside that, get me an element that has an ID called root. So it's going to go here, find an element that has an ID called root. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say replace those content with this thing. So rend.render will basically render our React.js component on this HTML div tag. Okay, so we're just following the simple thing. Now, strict mode basically means this is going to follow very strict JSX rules. We're going to talk about this in another video about detail about what JSX rules are. If you want, you can just skip this part as well. You can remove this, and for our sake, we're just going to change this app to do app. So now what we're calling it, we're saying, hey, I have a to do app. I want to call this. This is what we, in other simple words, function calling is. So we declared a function here, or in other words, a component in terms of React.js. Okay, and then we call that function here using this tag feature here. Now this behaves as a component. Now why are we calling it a component? Because in React.js, everything is a component. It's like a Lego blocks. So you build a small block and another block and another block, then you can combine them together. So here we just build a one simple block called hello world. And now we're calling that block here inside our main file. So you just declare the components here. To render it, to render output, you need to go inside the main.jsx and then call this to do app. Once you do that, Control S. Now this means that when you execute the code and come back here, you will see a hello world here. Now you have your hello world. How this is again happening? Very simply. When you go to the browser is actually displaying you the HTML file. Okay, so this HTML file is this one, index.html. In this HTML file, there's a standard metadata. We have a div tag called root. We have a script that's telling us that, hey, my source is this main.jsx file. So this is a script that is loading in our system. From this index, it's calling this main.jsx. So we go inside the main.jsx. Here we actually, this main.jsx is like a manager. It manages all the components and puts them together in an organized way. Okay? So this main.jsx is why we use it. So this main.jsx finds that HTML content called root and then renders this each component on that HTML file like a manager. So we need to create this main.jsx to manage our components. Then individual components are actually declared in a separate file. You can declare multiple components on the same file as well. Usually in my practice, we recommend that separate them in the separate files. Much easier, much simpler code to work with. To create a component, then you create a new file, name it as your component.jsx. The way we work with it, we import a React use state from React file needed for this work. Then we're going to say, hey, function to do app. Again, this is your component name, bracket start, bracket close, curly bracket start, curly bracket close. Then this component's second major rule is needs to have a return statement h1, again, meaning that it needs to return HTML. So the first rule, function, app name. Third rule, it must have a return statement. Okay, and fourth rule is it must return an HTML content. That's how the things work. It needs to have a return statement. It needs to return an HTML statement. Then in order to use this component as an individual block, you need to export it as well. So you need to enable the export feature as well, in other words. So we export default to do app. Again, the same name is followed. This way, now our component is reusable. I can reuse this component anywhere in my code I want. So I go back to my main. Then now in order to use it, I import it in this file. So using the import statement to do app from to do.jsx. So now this is the line that we use to import this newly created component in the main file. And then because we gave it a name called to do app, you can name it any other thing, by the way. It's not necessary that you name it exactly same. But again, as a standard practice, good, best practice as we call them, just name them same. Once this is done, voila, your code is ready. You save it, go back to your browser, hello world is printed. Now your component is basically running. Understand? Wonderful. Now, moving forward, what we need to do is we need to create a simple to-do app. Okay, now, so once we are here, let's start working with the to-do app. Now, the first thing we do is we have already created a return statement. We have created a component. So because we're going to need multiple HTML contents, so the rule is that now if you have a multiple HTML components inside the React, you use the bracket start, bracket close, okay, and then you specify a semicolon at the end. And then I'll just delete this line first. Okay, so once we have this basically means that we are creating a React component with multiple HTML lines. Okay, so because we are returning multiple HTML lines, we're just going to use this div tag and then with the brackets. If it's a single line, no need for these brackets, but if there are multiple HTML content, we use this div tag. Once we are here inside the div, now we create this h1 content and we're going to say, hey, let's just create to do app. So this becomes our first component. So if I save it, go back to our code, now we have a to do app here. Okay, wonderful. Now, next thing we need to do is we need to import and bring some more content to our code, such as in bringing the input fields. Okay, so after this, we just come here and we create an input tag in input, and then we're going to specify its type to be of text. Okay, and then we're just gonna close this tag. Now do remember that if you're doing HTML input tags don't have a closing tag. But the rule with React.js that every tag must be properly closed following the HTML5 standard. We use the backslash closing tag. Control S, come back to our code, and you will notice that now you have an input tag available. Wonderful. Once you've done that, let's just add a button to it so that when I click on a button, it adds the task. To do that, we create again a tag called button. Okay, and then we close this, and then we say add task. Okay, control S, come back here, and now you know we have a button here. Very simple, very basic HTML that we need to do. Okay, so once you follow these two things, now let's just add a state. So that means that when I add text here, it needs to remember and add it into the state. To do that, we have to again make sure that you have import React use state from React statement. Okay, so we need to use this use state hook to store the tasks the user adds. Add this import statement at the top of your code, which is compulsory. Okay. Once you do that, the next step is to add two pieces of state. We need to add two pieces of state to our component here. These pieces of state allows us to store the list of tasks and one to store the current value entered in the input field. Let's just do the first step. So we create a constant, okay, and then we in square brackets we add a variable called tasks. Okay, this is the task that are going to be stored. Then we're going to say set tasks. Okay, so this is a standard method of creating a state inside React.js. It maintains what we are trying to do. So we say now use state, and then we're going to use round brackets with square brackets and then the semicolon. What this is going to do is going to save this state information. So it stores the tasks that we are going to create in our state, meaning in our current temporary memory. Okay, so then we create another constant variable, and then we add a new task. So we're going to say, hey, this is the new tasks that are basically going to be added. New task, comma. So this is like storing the previous task in our memory, in our virtual memory. Then we create a new task that we want to add, and then we say set new task, another variable. So we declare two variables here, and we're going to create them again using the same use state method. And then we say, hey, angle brackets, and this time just this thing single apostrophe. So single task is going to be stayed here. This is an array sign indicating that there will be multiple tasks inside this array. So this will hold all the tasks that we have added. This is going to hold the current task that we are going to add into our system. So it's going to add the new task in our thing. So once you do that, now we need to read the information from our text input and store it in our code. Okay, so to do that, we come inside our input, and then remember we already have text value. Just press enter here so that we can enter more content. Inside the 10 input type, we're going to now add something called value. Okay, value is equals to expression and then new task. So this variable that we just created, new task, we're going to pass it here. So what it's going to do is as soon as we enter the value, this information is going to go inside this thing. The square bracket, the curly brackets here indicate a JavaScript expression. So the standard JSX rule specifies that if you are using expressions, in other words, a JavaScript expression or variable inside our HTML, we use these angle brackets. Because we are writing HTML content here and we want to process a JavaScript or JSX code, we use these square curly brackets to indicate that this is a JSX piece of code that holds this current state variable information. Once you do that, now we want to use information about our onChange event. So we're going to say onChange. Okay, so that every time user changes some expression, we want to make sure that the value is there. So we want to update the state as user types the information. To do that, we are using an onChange event is equals to, and then we're going to process the same thing, curly brackets, because this is going to be a JavaScript, and then we're going to use event e, oops, round brackets event e means the current event that you are going to have use equals to, for the current event, create an arrow function, and then we're going to say set new task. So this set new task becomes our function name. This becomes our variable name. This becomes our function name. So we're going to say every time the event is changing, so for current event, execute this new task function, which is again called an arrow function in our React.js. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to say, hey, e dot target. So wherever current event has triggered, dot value, read its current value, and store it in our information. So this is going to update the state as the user types the information here. Okay, so now we did two things. First, we applied a value. So the whatever current value is being entered in the text field, save it inside this new task variable. And then as I'm typing it, the event is changing. So the event information is actually driven through this set new task. That way, every time I'm typing in information, that this function is called and its current value is being updated and monitored. Okay, once you do that, now it becomes much easy. So initializing the tasks for an task as an empty list. So this is going to initialize the task. Then this new task will basically initialize the state for our new tasks as an empty string as well. So this is going to initialize it as a new empty string. This value new task feature binds the input field to the new tasks, so it reflects what the user types. Okay, the change event in essence for changes in the input field and updates the new task accordingly. Okay, so this is how these 4 lines of code basically behave. Once you do that, now let's add the logic to adding the task in our current state. To do that, we go and again from here, if we write the constant, something called another arrow function is just created in constant add task is equals to bracket start bracket close equals to angle brackets and then brackets curly bracket start curly bracket close. So what we're now doing is we created another arrow function inside our main component. This arrow function is called add task. So as soon as user clicks on a button, we want to execute this thing and then we want to add the task. So what we're now doing is we write a simple if statement to validate our code is valid or not. So we say new task. Okay, dot again, new task is the new task that has been added in our system. So we say this is new task. Let me just trim out the values. What this will do is it will remove all the spaces before and after that. Then we're going to check, hey, if this is not equal to blank, ensuring that when we enter the value, it must be completely filled. So this way we are validating our content as well. So if I'm typing something here, if I just don't type anything and click on add button, it should not add any task here. Okay, so that way I will ensure that everything is a properly legitimate text. Blank text should not be there. Then we're going to call this set task function that we just created here, set tasks. And we're going to say, listen, this set task needs to read the task information. So we give it this square brackets, triple dot, and then we say tasks, and then comma, we updated with this new task variable. Okay, this way, now what we have done is we have set our tasks. So now we call this function and we are saying, hey, using this function, read the previous value inside the array. Remember, we created an array state and then add this new task inside that array. So these 3 dots are actually used to indicate that we are creating a new array. Okay, so this new task adds the new task to the existing list of tasks using the spread operator. Technically, this is known as a spread operator. Okay, so using this basically means that whatever value already exists, append this new value inside it. That way, we will ensure that our tasks are actually appended correctly. Once this is done, then we set new task variable value to blank. Now empty the new task list. So this way, when I add it, this will become empty and the task is actually added to the new list. Make sense? Hopefully a little bit. Okay. Once you do that, that should be all okay. This means that we have now created a function that initially checks if the value is blank or not. If it is blank, completely ignore it. If it is not blank, then set the task to a new task. Means append a new task to the my set tasks list. Because we are managing a state, it means that it remembers what I did previously and what I want to do next. That's how the hooks works, a state hook works. Okay, once you do that, now we need to make sure we add an event to our button as well. So on the button, we come here and we add on click event, and then we're going to say, hey, sorry, BUTT on button, and then we're going to call this function add task. This means that every time user clicks on this button, we execute this on task button. This is going to check what's happening. If there is a value in our array, perfect, add this new value that we have just entered here. So if I save it, come back inside our code and I say hello task, add a value, it adds the text to it. Of course, we have not displayed it yet. So next step is we need to go and display this list. To do that, now what we need is we need a map function. Map function is used in React.js. It's actually a JavaScript function that allows us to render each task as a list item. Okay, to do that, what we will be doing is we will come inside our code here, inside the div tag. After the button value, we're going to add unordered list ul. Okay, and then we're going to set this ul to be of a simple map function using JavaScript. So we first of all say tasks dot map bracket start bracket close, and inside this we're going to say, hey, I have something called task comma index. Okay, so and then we're going to create an arrow function that allows us to customize this code dynamically. And we're going to say, again, because this is arrow function, we use round brackets. Inside this round brackets, we're going to say list item space, we're going to define key is equals to again expression, and we're going to say this index number, which is the default index number, belongs to task, which I think should also be written inside the expression. Okay, so we say task and list item close. So this will render each task in the list item. This task actually is this task variable that we created here. That way, we will basically be able to render each component on our code. So this is what we call a map function is in JavaScript. It allows us to read the content of an entire list. Okay, so since we added the items inside our array list, now we use this task variable tasks.map. So read each task inside the map based on its index values and then update it inside our list item. If I press Control S, come back here, so this task is now loaded. I didn't even enter the task. I entered the task previously, but because we are managing the state, it remembers, hey, there's a task in my list. Now if I add another task 2, click on add, see this task 2 is added. So if I add, for example, task 3, voila, simple to-do list app is created for us. So using this map functions inside the JavaScript, we can easily maintain and read the items from our list and print it. The way it works is, again, it says go inside the task.map function, read each task and save it inside the task variable based on its index values. So it's automatically going to iterate through each of the tasks from 0 index, save it inside the task variable, and then we're going to say on the first index, this is again key, becomes our first index belonging to our task value. So that way we are printing our list items in our simple list. That's it. That's how we basically process. So UL is an unordered list, and we use the task map functions to loop through each task and display it inside our list item tags. The key index parameter gives each list item a unique identifier. React needs this for an efficient rendering. So this is going to have each unique identifier because React is going to need this. So once I save it, come back here, as you will notice, as soon as I enter, we have a list item here. This list becomes blank because, again, remember, we have set text to blank. So every time we enter a task, it's just going to go inside and blank it out and add the item here. Perfect. Okay, wonderful, right? So as long as this is running, it will remember all the tasks. So remembering because we are managing the state hooks, and then it's just like remembering thing in your virtual memory. Now let's add the final delete function. If I want to delete a particular task, how do I do that? To do that, we will add a delete button next to each task so that the users can remove the tasks from the list. Okay, so we go inside our first, let me just create a function. Okay, so instead of where we added the task, just like this, we will add another function called constant, and this time it will be delete task. Okay, so this will delete the task. So we're going to say is equals to, and this is going to take one prop, which is going to be our index. Prop is like an argument. Okay, so we're going to pass it an index value which we want to delete. Bracket slab close. In this case, there was no argument, no props. Here we have passed it a prop. Prop behaves like a value, like an argument. So we're passing it an index argument so that we want to delete each index value. So see this, each item is there, but it's saved along a particular index. So we want to know which item we want to delete. To do that, we will basically now use something called, again, constant. And then we're going to say, hey, let's update it. Tasks, let's create this variable is equals to, we're going to go inside this tasks variable that we create in our option. We're going to say, hey, filter it out, and then bracket start, bracket start, bracket close. Okay, and then semicolon here. So inside this filter, we will remove the tasks. To do that, we use a function value or a structure called underscore comma I, and then we're gonna create an arrow function is equals to I, not equal to index. Okay, so this is basically checking our values. I will explain in a moment what exactly we're trying to do, but this is actually filtering out the values. We are using React.js filter to remove the task, finding the which task we have, and we want to remove that. So we created again another arrow function. We iterate through it. If it's not equal to index, we just want to remove that. Okay. Once you do this, then we're going to say, hey, set task and updated tasks. Okay, so we call this variable updated tasks here. So it's basically gonna iterate through each, remove all the one that we have just clicked on, and then repopulate and update the entire task list, and then populate this set tasks function here. So set tasks holds all the tasks that we have in our state. Then let's just create this button on which we want to delete the task. So if I come back inside our unordered list, we have a list item key which adds each list item. Inside here, we're going to say, listen, I want to add a button. So inside this list item here, we're going to go and we're going to say, for this task, after this task, I need a button. Okay, so if I just move it like this, so we have a list item key is our index. We have added our task inside this list item. After this task, we want to add something called a button. So we add another button here, space, and we want to say on click. Okay, on click, again square brackets, we create a function here, is equals to, and then we say, hey, delete task, we call this function, and we pass it this prop called index. Okay, and then we're going to say delete, this thing should be okay, delete it, and after this we close the button and then we say delete. That's it, control S. So now we create, after each task has been added inside this list, we add a button next to it. We provide an on-click event on it. These curly brackets indicate that we have um, a JavaScript expression. This expression uses an anonymous arrow function that when I click on a button, a function is executed. That function calls this delete task button, passing it the index value that we have currently assigned to each list item element. So this list item element will then executed. So let's just test this out first, and then I'll try to explain a little bit more what we're doing. So once I have it, see this, it's automatically updated. I don't need to do refresh. It's just there. Now, if I want to delete task, if I delete it, see this, the task is deleted. The list is automatically updated. Let's delete task number 4. Delete it. It's all deleted and the list is automatically updated. Everything is working perfectly fine. So how this is working is that we use this delete task function that removes the tasks based on its index value. Okay, so this tasks dot filter, now this is the key thing that actually is doing the job. It creates a new array excluding the task at the given index. So this basically will create a new task, filter out the index value that we have given. That's what it is trying to do. So it's going to just create the all, in other words, regenerate the entire list from the state, and then see, this index, I don't need this index, so it's just going to remove that, skip that index. That's why we're filtering out a particular index from the task list. The delete button in the end will basically call this delete function and it will remove the data. Okay, since everything is being managed by the state, every time we come back here, it remembers what we're trying to do and we can add new tasks to it. Click on save, this new task updates accordingly at the bottom of the list. Okay, so this works. Okay, so now finally, once you have this, you have an entire code working. Review this, try to follow along. If you want to access the source code, please do visit my blog. I have a blog, again I will leave the link in the description where you can find this entire source code, hopefully in a better explanation of the things that we are trying to do as well. Okay, so wonderful. If you have done this, if you have managed to create it, you have created your first React app. I know some of the concepts might be a little too advanced at the moment, but don't worry. I will be making more tutorials and briefingly giving you a detailed description of each things that we are doing in the software. But in a nutshell, we use the state here. The state is like a hook. It maintains what the user is doing in a virtual memory. Every activity is managed. We created an arrow functions. Okay, we created another arrow functions to delete it. We use filters here to repopulate the list and filter out the index that we don't want. At the same time, we have used input fields and we've created another function that stores the current task in our state value. We have used maps to iterate through each of our lists item and then save its index value based on whatever item has been added and store it. Okay, and then at the end, don't forget we already had exported the default to do app. That means that this is an entire one single component, and we have exported that component, and then we use a main.jsx that imports this component and uses this component here. Okay, so once you execute the code, actually index file gets executes. Index calls this main.jsx. It calls your component to do app, and you can have as many components as you want. Voila, fantastic. Control S, come back here. Our tasks has been added. To-do list is complete. Okay, wonderful. So I hope you understand this. This becomes your first React app. Try to create a few more apps. Let me know in comments what you thought or not. If you want to access the source code, let me know in the comments and I will share the link with you. Share the entire source code as well. Hopefully you will find this quite useful. So, and then again, I will be recording more lectures on React.js. If you want to learn more, please do subscribe and follow along. This is Dr. Zeeshan signing off.